Hello everyone, Professor Quizzlick here. So I just wanted to give an update to talk to you all about recent events in Russia, Ukraine, the peace talks, and then the really unprecedented strikes that the Ukrainians had in Russia. So let's first start with the peace talks. So in a previous video, I talked about one of the demands by Russian authorities was for territorial concessions. So now that we have a better understanding of what the Russians want for a quote peace plan to look like, I thought it was worth thinking about for a few minutes and making a video on. So Russia's demands for the war to stop are these territorial concessions where Russia insists that Ukraine withdraw from and officially give up parts of Ukraine, including the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, and recognize Crimea as being part of Russia. We know this is a non-starter. These are very maximalist demands from the Russian authorities, and giving up this much, or maybe even giving up any pieces of Ukraine, is just a non-starter. The Ukrainian authorities have said that this is a non-starter, especially this much territory. Donald Trump, some in the Trump administration have said that, okay, maybe Crimea should be given to the Russians, but the Ukrainian authorities certainly are not going to, they have made it clear at least that they are not going to give up this level of territory. Even Crimea, Zelensky and others in the Ukrainian government have said this is a non-starter. So these are very maximalist demands by the Russian authorities. The Russian authorities have also demanded neutrality and non-NATO alignment for the Ukrainians going forward. Russia's demands are that Ukraine must declare permanent neutrality, abandon its aspirations to join NATO, and prohibit any foreign military presence on its territory. Here we see that Zelensky and the Ukrainian government has said that they would be open to a neutrality pact like this. Even before the full-scale invasion, Zelensky was talking about signing an agreement saying that Ukraine would not try to join NATO. We don't really know where this stands today. Zelensky might be open to signing a non-alignment, but this idea of mutual security is a concern for Ukraine. We've heard and we've seen speeches of Zelensky and others in power saying that even if we have an agreement, some sort of agreement to stop the fighting today, Russia might just go home, continue to rearm, to rebuild their military, to rebuild their armaments, and then attack down the road. So we hear a lot about the Ukrainians wanting this mutual security, which NATO guarantees. It is the driving force of NATO, that an attack against one is an attack against all. So there's this real concern that if there is not some security guarantee, that the Russians would just invade again down the road in a few years. So that's, again, a very maximalist position. The Russians also call for significant reductions in Ukraine's military capabilities, including limits on the size of its armed forces and on the types of weapons it can possess. Again, a very maximalist position. It's hard to envision the Ukrainians agreeing to not be able to defend themselves. And as we will talk about in a few minutes, the Ukrainians are actually doing quite well at taking offensive measures against Russia. And what maybe isn't talked about as much is a lot of the weapons that the Ukrainians are using are being built in Ukraine. There is a defense industry booming in Ukraine where a lot of the defensive and offensive weapons that the Ukrainians are using are being built in Ukraine, relying less and less on outside forces. which the Ukrainians say is important because of the dynamics with the United States right now, of maybe the US being less than willing to continue arms shipments to Ukraine. So Ukraine's domestic arms industry has really grown. So again, this is a very maximalist position from the Russians to say they will limit the types of weapons that the Ukrainians can have. The Russians are also demanding cultural and political measures where Ukraine has to grant official status to the Russian language, ban nationalist groups, and prohibits, quote, the glorification and propaganda of Nazism and neo-Nazism. This goes into Russia's idea that there are Nazis throughout Ukraine, that the government of Ukraine is Nazi. Again, the Ukrainian authorities responded that this is a rubbish claim. We know the Azov battalion had some ties to neo-Nazi groups. The Azov battalion isn't around anymore like it was prior to the full-scale invasion. Even the soldiers who were around then are no longer in the battlefield. So that, again, a maximalist position, Russia trying to impede into Ukrainian domestic politics, into Ukrainian domestic policy. Russia is also demanding the lifting of all international sanctions, the resumption of trade, the resumption of diplomatic relations, and the restoration of Russian transit gas through Ukraine. Again, this is a very maximalist position that many Western European states aren't too ready to just drop sanctions. Although sanctions are probably hurting Europe's economy far more than the US's economy. We see that Ukraine is not ready to go just back to normal. And Western Europe, the same, not ready to go back to normal, not ready to drop sanctions. Here in the U.S., we've seen the administration seemingly be open to dropping sanctions, at least pulling back sanctions. But right now, we have senators who are saying, no, we're actually going to put new sanctions. Lindsey Graham was just in Ukraine, I think 2 days ago. And he's talking about new sanctions against Russia, a new sanctions package. So we see that these really maximalist demands by the Russian authorities don't really jive, don't really go, they don't align with the reality we see in Ukraine and Western Europe, and really even in the United States. So we can think maybe they're taking a very strong stance and then they will pull back some. But the talks in Istanbul a couple of days ago were short. Some reports were between the Russian and Ukrainian authorities. They were there for like an hour and then they were done because these demands just are not. The Ukrainian authorities just say no. And so so we have these pretty maximist positions from the Russians. And then we know that the Ukrainians did these pretty big military operations, including Operation Spiderweb on June 1st, where Ukraine executed a large-scale drone offensive targeting Russian air bases, housing nuclear-capable bombers. The Ukrainians, we still don't 100% know. We're starting to get some verification, but it looks like the Ukrainians used about 120, 117 drones, destroyed or damaged approximately 34% of Russia's strategic bombing fleet, targeting Tu-95 and A-50 aircraft, some of which are irreplaceable by the Russians. Some estimates, again, this is still coming out, but some estimates that it did about $7 billion in damage. And then on June 3rd, the Kerch Bridge attack, where Ukrainian security services conducted a significant operation against the Kerch Bridge, which is the bridge between Russia and Crimea. I'm sure we've all seen pictures of it, where underwater explosives were planted over several months, resulting in pretty substantial damage to the bridge's structural support. So we see Russia taking a very maximalist position for negotiations, and then the Ukrainians also taking the fight to Russia, destroying a lot of strategic airplanes, attacking the Kerch Bridge. And this isn't the first time it's been attacked. I think it's reopened by now, but it is showing Russia, and it's kind of showing the Russian people that the Ukrainians can strike near the border as well as deep inside of the country. So it does raise the question of, do these attacks from Ukraine change the calculus that Russian negotiators have to think about? Will it put pressure on the Russian authorities to have less maximalist positions to end the war? Because there is inside Russia a growing dissent. Again, Russia's an authoritarian regime, there's suppression in Russia. But as these strikes continue to occur deeper and deeper into the heartland of Russia, this will bring the war home to Russian citizens in a way that, due to the authorities controlling the media, due to the way the authorities control the narrative of the war, that it might actually put some pressure on Vladimir Putin to bring the war to an end. And we don't know how much pressure is actually on Putin, or if the Putin regime will just pick up repression and repress dissent more. But this could be an avenue to put pressure on the Putin regime to then have less maximalist positions when it comes to the negotiation, and maybe that will actually lead to a drawdown of the war. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about those two things, the biggest things going on with the war right now. Thank you.